Hey everyone, so in this part, now that we have our textures completed, we're going to be actually setting up the particle systems needed to make the Moogle shop base. We're going to start off by first making the actual base giant, glow that you see that's clipping the geometry here in Unity, since that's going to be, the start of the rest of the effects and help us size everything up. So let's go ahead and hide this for now and create a new empty game object, reset its position, and name it Moogle shop or whatever you're calling your version of the effect. So we're going to go ahead and now create a effect particle system, and this is going to be our folder particle system, so we're going to put everything else in here. This one itself is not going to do anything, so we can turn all the modules off, and we can call this, well, particle systems. And then let's go ahead and add a new particle system inside this one and call this one base. For this, we didn't create a textures because we don't actually need to create any new texture for this. We're just going to use the default particle as is. We'll go ahead and actually use a mesh type object to render the particle system, and then we'll go ahead and select quad, which is one of the defaults, and then we'll set the render alignment to local, and that way we can start rotating it and they'll face that direction. So in this case, we obviously don't want these many particles coming out. We also don't want it to move, so we can set the speed to 0. And set the lifetime to, I don't know, maybe like 2. And let's set the emission to 1 for now. And also take out the shape so they all spawn in one position. And then we can just simply, rotate it so that its z-axis faces up like that. And that's it, right? So that's good. That's a good start for now. Let's set the start size to 2 because just like in the effect, even though this might be, let's say, 1 meter, so the radius is 0.5, this seems to be much bigger, so that's what this is, using the alpha blended pre-multiply shader by default in Unity, and that's good enough. We're going to set it to change color over lifetime, just like it does in this, and you can see it's going from, if I play it, you can see it's going from purplish to blue, right? So one way to do that is to set the color over lifetime. Let's set the middle part to purple, I guess. This sort of purple, darkish purple. And the outsides to something blue, like this, something really light blue, like that. And we can just go ahead and copy that and paste it at the end. So what does this produce? Something not too great, because it also needs to fade out and fade in on the edges. And then at the middle, 50%, needs to be fully opaque, so it fades in and does that. Another way to do the same thing, maybe even better way, would be to actually set the start color to be a gradient so they kind of fade in that way, but in this case it's fine. And this is actually going a little bit too fast, so we can set the lifetime to be maybe 3 seconds or 4, and then maybe set this to 0.5. Alright, so that's good enough. Again, we can even turn this up to like 8 and set this to 0.25 as well. Right, so we still only have 2 particles. They're just they last a long time, and the spawn rate is really slow. So this is actually pretty good, so we'll use this instead. This is a good base to start off with. Next, we'll duplicate this because we're going to be using some of the same configurations, and we're going to work on actually adding this spinny bit right here, using the purple-green textures that we made, or the one texture that we made in the last tutorial. So for that, I already have the material set up. We're going to be using an additive material, I think, and again, I already have the material for that as part of Ultimate VFX 2, which is, currently being worked on. And so I'm just going to go ahead and find it and then drag it in. So where is it? Here it is. No, wait, that's not it. Nope, that's still not it either. What did I call it? Something really weird, I'm sure. Oh, here it is. Okay, so you can see I'm using an additive texture for that, and using sorting fudge, I can kind of actually layer it. I'm going to set it to maybe -2, so it shows up the same as being slightly above it, like that, and set this to maybe start size 1. So it's there. This is what it looks like so far. And maybe start spinning it around. So go to rotation over lifetime, enable that module. And let's see. Yes, let's set this to like 360. Maybe that's too fast. That's pretty good. And we don't want any of the color over the lifetime coloring, so we can just set this back to these ones to white. The other stuff can stay. So we do want it to fade in and out, but we don't want it to be changing color. And let's turn this down to like an appropriate level, maybe 96, or even 128, which is half. forgot the one there. Yeah, so 96 or 128, both. I think I'll go with 96 because it's a little bit more subtle. That looks pretty good. So we're starting to actually build this up. Next, we'll do this Caustic Cylinder. So the cylinder we're going to use, actually, let me just rename this first. Base green purple, because that's what I named it in the previous copy I had. So next, we'll actually be making the cylinder. Now, the cylinder we made in the last tutorial for the shader tunnel, so I'll leave a link to that tutorial in the description so you can follow it along and make it using ProBuilder. But in this case, I'll just duplicate something from the warp tunnel, right? So let's say I duplicate this one from the warp tunnel, which is the other tutorial. And now I get this, right? This is obviously way too big, so we can shrink it down on the Y to something like 0.25, right? What did I have for this? Yeah, it's 0.2. So let's something like 0.2. Now this causes a problem because now it's all flattened out. So what we need to do is actually create a new material using the same blue caustic no noise. So we can just duplicate that. We can call it like the tutorial version. So we can call it Moogle shop base caustics. This is for the tutorial, so I'll just name it tutorial. And we'll assign it to this cylinder using ProBuilder's material editor. We'll just go ahead and apply this. So it's the same thing. It's just really messed up looking. So we need to basically change, and this is the alpha blend version, by the way. We need to change the, not the offset, but the tiling to maybe like 4. Stretch this out as well, or rather unstretch it to like 0.5. And that's better. And I think that's actually what the other one was as well. So yeah, 5 and 5. So I did 4 and 5, but we can do 5 and 5. So that looks better. And there you go, right? So there you have that. And this one was also, actually this doesn't quite fit for some reason. What was this at? It was 1.25. Okay, so this was actually 1.25, and there you go. Now it fits the radius of the this as well. So there you have that. You can also duplicate it and then invert the normals, so you have the inside version, the outside version as well. And you can just rename those. So for example, this one could be called cylinder outer, and this one could be called cylinder inner because only the inside is active versus the outside not being anything. So call this cylinder inner, like so. And yeah, this looks okay. It's not too bad. Let me just go and maybe I can mess with this a little bit more because right now, I don't know. 0.4 actually almost seems better. It's really up to you. Again, you can keep, messing with this. You can look at this, what this looks like, and compare and change it up however you want. This one actually has even less distortion, so it's like 0.15 or something. And it seems to be moving up a little bit faster, so we can change the speed here, for example, to be like 3.5. Right, so now it's going up faster, and it's just slightly spinning around. We can speed up the speed at which it spins around. If I made this like 1, you could see that's way too fast, but something like that. Something to closely match this. So it's actually barely seems to be spinning around, if at all. It might just be an illusion, but this is good. We can also turn the opacity down on this to match a little bit better, right? Or even the color. You could even make this red if you wanted to keep messing around with it. And this one was what? Yeah, this one's actually additive. That's the other problem. So this needs to use the additive version of the... So if we do this, I think that looks better. Yeah, so that's pretty good, and we'll just leave that as is for now. Next, we'll work on the rising particles, right? So at this point, we more or less have this effect already finished. So we're gonna base the rest off what we have in this version, and then we have the particle systems, these little dots rising. So we'll work on that instead. So let's hide this, create a new particle system, like so. Set the shape to a circle this time. And then again, just like before, make it so that the Z points up, and that's the same as -90 on X. Let's scale this down to 0.5 so that it fits around. And the reason, by the way, this needed to be 0.125 is because if you look at the texture for that we made, it has some space from the edges, right? Just to accommodate for the glow. So that's why. So anyways, yeah, so 0.5, that'll help it fit. And then we want these to be rising up rather than going in any other directions. Let's set the speed to 0 for now. Let's turn the size down. We can reuse the texture that we made in the tutorial when we did the original game VFX breakdown for the fly particles from Kingdom Hearts, so you can use that. I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. In this case, I'm going to use the ones from Ultimate VFX 2, which is Glow Sphere Additive. And let's leave this at 0.2 for now. We'll probably change this soon enough. And then set the radius thickness to 0. So what this basically controls is how much of the circle it's filled in as like an emitter. So if I do this, right, it's emitting as if the circle was kind of like a thick line, versus this is right at the edge, versus this, which is the entire volume, 1 being the entire volume of the circle. So we want only the edges, basically. So we can set that to 0. And then we, of course, want them to rise. So let's set velocity over lifetime, not this Z, right? Because remember that Z is the one that's pointing up. So we want it to go up on Z. We just turn this up to like 1.5 or 1 something. Well, some of you want them to rise a little bit faster. Maybe turn their lifetime down to 2 and maybe vary the lifetime actually from 2 to 3. And then maybe 2.5 or something. And then maybe even turn this up to 25. And vary the start color from maybe this bluish to orangish or reddish color. Right now the size is also way too uniform for my liking, so let's turn that up to maybe like 3.5. That's pretty good. That's actually really fat. 128, 128. This is using an additive shader / material, by the way. So the material is using an additive shader. And then they're just kind of popping out of existence, which is no good. So we can have them size over lifetime. So we can have them fade in first. So we can create a new key, right click, add a new key, clamp data to flatten it out, and then have them fade in like that, and then just fade out like that regarding their size. So they do something like that, and that looks pretty good. We can actually even make this bigger now, just because, maybe not, that's fine. Yeah, so that's pretty good. Start lifetime, maybe if I want to make it 4 or 5. No, that's fine. And we can also vary the speed at which it rises, so make it like 0.4, 0.25, and 0.4. Just add some variety. You can experiment with the thickness as well if you really wanted to. Right, make them spawn like that or this, depending on the effect you're going for. So far this should all be local, and I should be able to spin it around, and it'll keep continuing throwing out in the direction I want it to, because so far I've set up everything in a local way. If I really wanted, I could switch everything up to use world space, and then it would just, you know, look more like that. Well, this actually still looks the same, but if I moved it around, it wouldn't follow the effect around like it did before. Right, so if this was local, it follows the effect when I rotate it once this is set to local again. Right, so it does that instead. Okay, so that's looking good. Next, we'll work on the Twinkle Flares, actually, I think. So let's just name this Rising Dots, and we'll work on Twinkle Flares. So actually what I'll do instead of creating a new particle system is I'll duplicate this, and I'll call this Twinkle Flare, because it seems like they're going to be sharing a lot of the same settings. Turn the shape down though, right? So they're kind of like that, maybe 0.25. And their start lifetime is definitely much shorter, so 0.25 to 0.5. They also maybe elevate them a little bit, so they're kind of like here. You can barely see them, just spawning in and out. And we'll use the Twinkle Flare texture. Once you've assigned it to a material, use an additive shader. And here I've got the grayscale version of the Twinkle Flares that I created on an additive shader. Now they'll end up looking like this, because I'm using the same settings from before. And instead of going like this, I think what I want them to do is be instead not like that. Or actually, yeah, vertical billboard, and then maybe rotate them 90 degrees so they point that way. Because that's what they did in the other example. And because these are additive and I want them to be really bright, I can turn this back up. Now they're much brighter. And let's see. That's fine because they're kind of quickly coming in and out. Making them bigger maybe, 0.5, 0.25. What I can also do is stretch them out a little bit more, so I can actually set this to use a 3D start size. Have something like 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, maybe like 0.5 and 1, so that way they look like this, and have them rising up really fast. But then also shorten their lifetimes to like 0.1 and 0.25, right? So they kind of flickering out. And I don't want them to be this. I want them to be more of a greenish color, I think. Greenish bluish almost. Something like that. Fade this out. So it's almost whitish, or like more milky blue. That looks pretty good. Move them up a bit too. Yep, so that doesn't look too bad. It's a little bit different from the this one, but again, it's all a matter of just tweaking to get that sort of effect that you want. So these ones, I think actually, in the original were a bit more greenish. That's fine. Let's see. It just makes them really tall. So I mean, that could be a cool effect as well, but in this case, I think that's better. And let's see, I could also maybe stretch out the spawn area. Make this 5 or 2. Yeah, so that looks pretty good. I'll leave this at 1 actually. So that's good. That, you know, that's the Twinkle Flares. Next we'll do the little glitchy stuff here. So this one's actually interesting because I can't quite tell, but it almost seems like they might have it masked, right? It does seem to be random, so first we'll just have them going from side to side, and then after that I'll show you how to quickly mask them using a custom sprite you can make right inside Unity. So let's go ahead, and for this one I think we will need a new particle system. We're going to go ahead and set this to like a sphere, maybe, an oval sort of shape, but also much smaller, so you can turn the radius down. Also turn it up, maybe 0.5 or 0.25. Turn the radius up to 0.125 maybe. Barely kind of there. And we'll set this to the Twinkle Flare again, but additive. So that's good. And we'll have them going from side to side. To do that, we'll have to create or enable the velocity over lifetime module. 2 constants, maybe -1 and 1 in local space. So let's see what that produces. The camera's there. It should be going based on the camera's position from side to side because it is pointing forward this way. So this is positive, this is negative. And we need to also change this. So there we go. Okay, so that makes sense. I'll turn this down and obviously turn the lifetime down as well to like 0.25. And then you can see it going from side to side, which is looking more and more like this. Maybe flatten them out. So to flatten them out, we're going to need a 3D start size. And we can do a very, very small, this one, or like this, or even like this, or even smaller than that. And there you go. So now you have like the flat thing. This one's actually using completely different texture, but just so we could reuse it, save texture memory, and be more efficient that way. Okay, so they're going from side to side. We can also have size over lifetime, right? So again, the same thing. If we save the curve, we can have them going like this. That's pretty good. Maybe 2 by 2. Right, so they're kind of flying from side to side, and if I rotate this, what happens? If I rotate this, you see a problem, and if I rotate it after playing, you'll see what happens. That it breaks the illusion, right? They're no longer going side to side, they're going into the screen and then out into the screen, because now you're looking at it from this sideways perspective. So to fix that, what we can do is, because this is always going to be facing local, we can have the entire emitter rotate to face us, face the camera. And that's as simple as just creating a new script. So what you can do is, for example, add a new script, call it billboard. I already created a billboard script, but we'll create a new billboard script just so you can see how it's created. Billboard 2, I guess, and then I'll just capitalize it. Call it billboard 2, yep, C#. And And we'll open that up in, for example, Visual Studio and work on that real quick. So this is really not going to be an example of good programming, but really an update, or rather late update, so all the camera transformations might be done in your game. All you really need to do is get the main camera and have its forward equal your forward. So what you can do is, for example, transform.forward equals camera.main.transform.forward, which will make it look in the same direction as the camera, which is also, I guess, good enough in this case, but you can also do a transform look at towards the camera, and either is fine. So in one way, it looks in the same direction as the camera, right? So it's looking like I'm looking down, so it's looking down as well, which is fine as well. And so now when I rotate around it, it keeps going from left to right because it's rotating as I rotate the camera around as well. So you can see what that looks like, right? So you can do it this way, in which case it points away from the camera, or whichever way the camera is facing. Another way to do it is just transform look at camera if you want it to actually look in my direction. It just depends on how you want to go about this, because particles are two-sided in Unity by default anyways. So you can have it instead look at the camera main transform position. You probably also want to save this somewhere so it doesn't get called, because I think every time you actually reference this in update, it does like a full check throughout the scene. So either of these two will work. It'll just depend on which direction you'll be facing, right? So whichever one you want to do, go ahead and choose. Take your pick. So that concludes the glitch. Next thing we'll work on are the stars from our customized version of the effect. Let me just stop playing this. Right, so these ones right here that are popping in and out, and these just look nice, so we'll add those in. So let's hide this and name this to Twinkle Flare glitch masked. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, I forgot that I had a free version and a masked version. The free version really just means they're kind of free to go whichever way they want, and the masked version means they actually get clipped from the side. So one way to do that, and this is a new feature, and I think I forgot which version in Unity it was added in, but it's definitely there in 2017.1. All you have to do is set visible inside mask. Now they completely disappear right now because there is no mask yet. All you have to do is, let's say, create a new sprite, square, and I mean that's it. Just name it square and leave it as is. So let's create a new game object, create empty, and call it sprite mask, or select the sprite mask, and then drag the square in, and yeah, there you go actually. So you can see what area this square covers. If I, for example, do this, you can see how the particle gets clipped, right? So if you wanted to do that, you can mask them that way. So for example, if you had it like this, and if you make a more complicated sprite, you can have them sort of like a projector frustum instead. So this is good enough for now, I think. So next we'll work on stars for real. So we'll just call it sprite mask real quick. And we'll work on our stars. So let's create a new particle system. Again, this is going to require some new settings, so we'll create a new particle system. First of all, we'll select these stars. So whatever you called your PNG, and then whatever material you attached. And I just called it gummy star. It's an additive shader. We'll use that. And we'll turn off, actually we'll turn the speed down to 0 first, turn the lifetime to maybe 2. Turn this down for now, just so we can start seeing what we're doing. And maybe turn this down as well. And we can set this to, for example, some sort of orangish color, right? So here I'm using the grayscale version, which we can color in. But if you wanted, and if you rendered it out without the grayscale version, that is without the black and white, you could also just straight up use the color variant, like so. And then it's very lightly colored, but you can color it a bit more in Unity, right? So that's the advantage you get. And you preserve a little bit more of the detail in color this way, while still having control and being able to color it differently if you really wanted to, as long as it doesn't go too far away from the base texture color. So something like this. So let's turn this to sphere. We could also leave it as a cone, but we'll go for sphere for now. And like 0.25, and then have them shoot upwards, right? So initial velocity. In local, again, in this case, I haven't rotated it, so local would be y up rather than z because we haven't rotated it. And then we want maybe a force over lifetime. So again, for this, we could use gravity so that they start coming down. I've covered this, covered what that means, what the difference is, and how you can manipulate them in another tutorial in the original game VFX breakdown. So again, that's already going to be linked in the description. But here I'm not going to go in too much depth about that. So we'll go negative, maybe 2, right? So now they fall in, maybe turn this up a bit. Right, so it balances out. If you just turn the start speed up with the sphere, they actually kind of spread out. So again, a cone could also work for this because it'll naturally spread out, but in our case, I think this is fine. So maybe like 0.125, and then have them do that. We can also have size over lifetime. Again, reuse the curve that we've already made. And so we get this. Right, so we can turn 1 to 2 maybe. Have them go faster, but then fall faster to give it a tighter kind of drop. Right, so just keep balancing it however you want, maybe. So yeah, just keep tweaking it, but I'm going to leave it to something like this for now. And start rotation. Let's make those random between two constants, 360. So now it does that. And rotation over lifetime. So let's have them spinning in random directions. So maybe -90 and 90. So they actually spin around a little bit once they spawn. And they spin around that much by the end of their lifetimes. Right, we can move this up a tiny bit. And this is where we can put the actual gem that we'll get to. Okay, so for the gem, what you can do is actually go to Unity, and they actually put up their own free gem shader, which is really nice if you want to check it out. But if you don't want to do that, instead want to use the newer PBR shaders in Unity directly, I'm just going to get into stars, you can do that as well. So I'm going to use Pro Builder for that, right, to create the actual gem. But you can use the gem prefab that comes in this asset if you wanted to make it easier on yourself. So anyways, let's create a new shape. Let's create an icosahedron. We can turn the subdivisions down if we want a more crystal look, or turn it up if we want a more spherical look. Let's build this. And by default, you know, it has this sort of thing going on for it. Let's create a new material. We'll call it Moogle Shop Base Crystal Tutorial. And let's go to the material editor for this after putting it in Moogle Shop. And just assign that crystal material to this. Now we can mess around with this. So let's make it somewhat bluish, right, like that. Turn up maybe the smoothness or alpha. We can leave this alone for now. We also want it to be transparent, right? So like in this, you can see behind it, and you can see what's going on the other side of this crystal. So for that, let's just set it to a fade material, or a transparent material rather. Now we actually want the reflection. So to do that, and either way you have to do this for the other one as well, but create a new light reflection probe, right? And you can just center this inside this. And then this one can actually be centered as well. So where is this right now? So it's not centered by default, so you can just center the pivot, center this again, and maybe like set it to 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. Right, so it's somewhere centered like that. Maybe raise it up a little bit to 0.5, and there you go. So the reflection probe right now is real time, or is baked. You can make it real time, and that way you can see it'll actually reflect everything in the scene, including the particles, which can be really nice to add to your, as a reflection to this thing. And then if you go here and turn the smoothness up, well, now you can see the reflections. You can see what the reflections look like right there, right? So you can see how the reflections start showing up more and more the more smooth you make it. Now, right now they're really low res. If you wanted to turn them up at the cost of obviously some performance, you can turn them up as high as you really want them. You know, in my case, I have no problem handling you in higher resolution, like 2048, which is overkill. But yeah, you can do that, and you can see it reflected in the UV wrapping on the crystal. So it was about as easy as that, right? And again, you can keep messing with the transparency as well, so you can see a little bit through it. And if you turn this on and then spin around it, you'll see what happens. Right, so you can see how that's there. Refresh mode, if I set it to real time and then set the refresh mode to every frame, then you'll actually see changes in the world reflected through a cube map that's applied to the reflection on this. So right now you can see the lines from the grid here being reflected in the reflection of the crystal versus when I turn them off, right? So now they're gone. So you can do it that way. And one other thing I forgot to do, I guess, is the base should probably be pre-warmed. so that these start automatically, right? You want all of these, in fact, probably starting automatically, because unless you want them to fade in once the game starts, you want them to already be ready and fired up and going. So you can set them to pre-warm on, and that way they'll complete a full cycle by the time the game starts. So is that everything? I think that covers everything that we wanted to cover in the tutorial. So here you go, you got your own little Moogle shop base that we created from scratch, including even the crystal in this case. Alright, so here's our final effect. I think that about covers everything that we needed to cover. You can see the reflections, you can tweak the materials a little bit more, and I think this looks pretty great. It looks like a pretty good copy of what's in the game, plus we added a lot of our own flair into it that you can add into your own games and on your side as well. So yeah, please like this video, subscribe, comment on it, share it with your friends, and let me know what you think. And I guess I'll see you guys next time. Bye guys!